A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Modal. Learn more at modal.com.
Sound of a mechanical film projector starting up. The rhythmic clicking of the pull-down claw, the steady whir of the motor, and the low-frequency hum of the cooling fan. You know that sound, Herman? It is the sound of a story being told, but to an archivist it is also the sound of a countdown. That rhythmic clicking is actually a physical impact on the film's sprocket holes. Every time you play a vintage reel, you are technically destroying a little bit of it. It feels like the sound of history itself, but lately, I have been thinking about how that sound is actually a ticking clock. Today's prompt from Daniel is about the engineering and logistical crisis in national-scale digital preservation, and it is a perfect follow-up to our last episode on text digitization. We are moving from the relatively stable world of scanning paper to the much more terrifying world of time-based, hardware-dependent media.
It is a massive shift in complexity, Corn. Herman Poppleberry here, and I have been knee-deep in archival standards all week. When we talked about digitizing books, we were dealing with static objects. You light them, you take a high-resolution photo, and you have captured the essence of the thing. But with film and video, you are not just capturing an image, you are trying to translate a physical, mechanical process into a digital stream. The physical decay of the hardware that holds our history is arguably a bigger threat than the decay of the media itself. We are facing what experts call the digital dark age, but it is not just about files disappearing, it is about the machines that read them going extinct.
That is a wild thought. We usually worry about the film rotting or the tape demagnetizing, but you are saying the machines themselves are the bottleneck. It reminds me of those old sci-fi movies where they find a message from an alien race, but realize they have no way to play the recording. We are basically doing that to ourselves in real time. And it is not just about the distant past. Daniel mentioned the October 7 collection at the National Library of Israel, which represents a total pivot in how we think about archives. We are moving from archiving the past to trying to save the present before it vanishes into the void of link rot and deleted accounts.
We are living through a period that archivists call the equipment graveyard. If you want to digitize a U-matic tape or a Betacam SP, you cannot just go to the store and buy a new player. They stopped making the heads for those machines decades ago. National archives, like the Israel State Archives or the Jerusalem Cinematheque, have to maintain these specialized workshops that are essentially cannibalizing old hardware just to keep a few functional units alive. It is a literal race against the clock because once the last spare part is gone, once the last video head wears down, or the last custom integrated circuit fries, that history is effectively locked away forever, even if the tape is in perfect condition.
I can just see you in one of those workshops, Herman, surrounded by dusty gears and soldering irons, looking like a mad scientist trying to resurrect a VCR. But let's get into the scale of this. Daniel pointed out some numbers regarding the Israel Film Archive that are honestly a bit staggering. They have been at this for a decade. They have spent $10 million, and they have only finished 30% of the collection. That means 70% of their history is still sitting on shelves, waiting for a machine that might not work in 5 years.
The scale math is sobering. When you look at an institution like the Jerusalem Cinematheque, you are dealing with 35mm and 16mm film that is often shrunken or become incredibly brittle. You cannot just run that through a standard projector. If you did, the sprockets would act like a saw and tear the film to shreds. They use specialized equipment like the laser graphics scan station. These machines are incredible pieces of engineering. Instead of using a traditional sprocket-driven system that pulls on the film holes, they use a pinless sensor system. It basically floats the film on a bed of air or rollers and uses high-speed cameras to capture each frame, even if the film has shrunken by 2 or 3%. It uses a custom LED light source that doesn't generate heat, which is crucial because old nitrate film is basically solid rocket fuel. If it gets too hot, it doesn't just melt, it explodes.
So it is less like a projector and more like a very expensive, very gentle flatbed scanner for a moving ribbon. But even with that tech, if they are only 30% done after 10 years, the math says they have another 23 years of work left just to finish the current backlog. By the time they finish, the digital formats they started with in 2014 will probably be obsolete too. How do you even plan for a project that outlasts the technology used to start it?
That is the paradox of digital preservation. It is not a one-time project, it is a permanent commitment to migration. The archival community uses a framework called the Open Archival Information System, or ISO 14721-2012. It is a massive document, but it basically defines how you manage this information over the long term. It breaks the process down into functional entities: ingest, archival storage, data management, administration, preservation planning, and access. You are never just saving a file. You are building a system that can move that data from one storage medium to the next every few years. It is like a digital relay race where the baton is the data and the runners are the storage formats.
I think most people assume that once you put it on a hard drive or upload it to the cloud, the job is done. But you are saying the digital save is just the starting line of a marathon that never ends. And the cloud isn't the silver bullet we think it is, right?
The cloud is actually an access solution, not a preservation one. For the actual archival masters, most national institutions use a two-tier model. They keep the massive, uncompressed files on LTO-10 tape. That is linear tape open, and as of today in early 2026, it is the industry standard for cold storage. Each tape can hold up to 36 terabytes of raw data. It is not fast. You have to wait for a robotic arm in a data center to find the tape and put it in a drive. But it is incredibly stable. It has a shelf life of 30 years. Then they create smaller, compressed access copies for the public to actually watch.
Right. Because nobody wants to stream a 5 terabyte uncompressed file just to see a 30-second clip of a parade in 1950s Tel Aviv. But let's talk about those standards for a second. You mentioned things like FADGI and ASA. For the non-nerds listening, why does it matter which specific file format an archive uses? Can't they just use an MP4?
Oh, Corn, if you said that in an archivist convention, you would be chased out with pitchforks. An MP4 is a lossy, proprietary container. Every time you save it, you lose data. The federal agency's Digital Guidelines Initiative, or FADG1, and the International Association of Sound and Audiovisual Archives, or IASA, set the gold standards. For video, a lot of archives are moving toward a format called FFV1. It is a lossless codec that is open source. Because the code is open and well documented, a computer 500 years from now has a much better chance of decoding it than a proprietary secret format owned by a company that went bankrupt in 2030. For film, they often use DPX sequences, digital picture exchange, where every single frame of the movie is saved as an individual uncompressed file. It is the digital equivalent of a stone tablet.
That makes a lot of sense. You want the digital equivalent of a stone tablet, not a secret handshake. It is about making sure the data doesn't become its own kind of equipment graveyard, where the software is the part that is missing. But there is a human element to this engineering crisis too. The urgency of this really hits home when you look at Holocaust testimonies.
This is where the technical meets the tragic. Organizations like Yad Vashem and the USC Shoah Foundation are in a dual race. They are racing against the mortality of the survivors, of course, but they are also racing against the physical decay of the original tapes. A lot of those testimonies from the 80s and 90s were recorded on formats like Hi8 or Betacom SP. These tapes suffer from something called sticky shed syndrome, where the binder that holds the magnetic particles to the plastic tape starts to absorb moisture and turns into a literal glue. If you try to play a sticky tape, it will gum up the machine and rip the magnetic coating right off the plastic.
So you lose the voice of the survivor because the tape literally peeled itself apart.
Engineers sometimes have to bake the tapes in specialized ovens at very low temperatures for several hours just to temporarily stabilize the binder so they can get one final pass through a digitizer. It is the last mile problem of the 20th century. If those tapes are not digitized in the next few years, the magnetic signal will have faded so much, or the physical tape will have become so gummy that even the best engineers won't be able to recover it. We're talking about 55,000 testimonies in the Shoah Foundation alone. The engineering debt there is staggering.
It is a heavy responsibility. You are not just saving data, you are saving the actual voices of people who lived through the most significant events in history. And that brings up a really interesting shift in how archiving is happening right now. Daniel mentioned the October 7 collection at the National Library of Israel. This feels like a complete inversion of the traditional archival model. Normally, you wait for history to happen, then you collect the remains. Here, they are collecting while it is happening.
It is a fascinating and tragic case study in real-time archiving. Normally, an archive waits 50 years for a box of papers to show up in a basement. But with the events of October 7, the National Library realized that the history was being written in real time on Telegram, WhatsApp, and social media. They have already archived over 200,000 videos and digital items. This is what we call born digital content. And it is surprisingly fragile. You would think digital would be permanent, but link rot is real. A video gets posted to a private group, the person deletes their account, or the platform changes its terms of service, and suddenly that primary source is gone forever.
I have noticed that myself. You go to look at a news story from just 3 years ago, and half the embedded videos are just grey boxes that say, "This content is no longer available." It is like the memory of the internet is being erased as we use it.
The National Library is essentially trying to prevent a digital dark age for this specific event before it even happens. They are using crawlers and specialized tools to capture not just the video files, but the metadata, the context of how they were shared. Because a video of a phone call is one thing, but knowing the timestamp, the location, and the original thread it was posted in is what makes it a historical document. They are moving from FFV1 archival masters for film to capturing the raw data packets of a Telegram stream. It is a different kind of engineering crisis. One is about mechanical decay, and the other is about the sheer velocity of digital noise.
It is like they are trying to bottle lightning while the storm is still raging. It makes the 10-year project for the film archive look slow by comparison, even though the film archive is dealing with much harder physical challenges. But, Herman, let's go back to that scale math. If the Israel Film Archive has 70% of its collection left, and it has already taken 10 years and $10 million, what is the actual cost of finishing?
If you project it out, you are looking at another $25 to $30 million and at least 2 more decades of constant work. And that is assuming the machines don't break down permanently. The engineering debt of our national institutions is just massive. Every year they wait, the cost of digitizing a single hour of film goes up. The machines get rarer, the technicians who know how to fix them retire, and the film itself gets more brittle. It is a classic example of why underfunding archives is a form of cultural negligence. You are essentially deciding which parts of the past are allowed to exist in the future. If you don't fund the migration, you are hitting the delete key on history by default.
That is a pretty stark way to put it. We are the gatekeepers, whether we like it or not. If we don't put in the engineering effort and the money now, we are effectively deciding that the 1970s or the 1980s just won't exist for our grandchildren. It will be a blank space in the record.
I think there is a takeaway here for our listeners too, even if they aren't managing a national library. Most of us have our own equipment graveyards in our closets. Old camcorder tapes, hard drives from college, CD-ROMs with family photos. If you haven't moved those to a modern, redundant system, you are essentially gambling with your own history. Those CD-ROMs from 2005? The dye layer inside them is likely oxidizing right now. In 5 years, they might just be shiny coasters.
I was actually going to ask you about that. I have a box of mini DV tapes in my attic. I shouldn't just assume they'll be fine for another 10 years, should I?
Absolutely not. Mini DV is particularly nasty because it is a digital signal on a very thin magnetic tape. If the tape stretches even a tiny bit, the digital ones and zeros don't align anymore, and you get those weird blocky artifacts or total signal loss. You need to start a migration plan. Don't just dump them on one thumb drive and call it a day. Think like an archivist. Use the 3-2-1 rule.
Remind me of the 3-2-1 rule again.
3 copies of your data on 2 different types of media, say, one on a mechanical hard drive and one on an SSD or LTO tape, with 1 copy stored off-site like in the cloud or at a friend's house. And for the love of all things holy, write down the metadata. A video of a birthday party from 1992 is just digital noise if nobody knows whose birthday it was. In the archival world, we say, data without metadata is just a pile of bits. Metadata is the soul of the archive. It is the who, what, where, and why that turns a file into a record.
Metadata is the soul of the archive. I like that. It also reminds me of our discussion back in episode 7014 about the billion-year backup. We talked about the long-term struggle against the digital dark age there, but today's conversation really highlights how much of that battle is fought in the workshop with a screwdriver and a soldering iron. It is not just about high-concept physics. It is about keeping a 1975 Sony U-matic player running for 1 more week.
The physical reality of digital life is something people often ignore. We think of the cloud as this ethereal, weightless thing, but it is actually built on a foundation of very specific, very aging hardware. Whether it is a scan station in Jerusalem or an LTO drive in a data center, someone has to keep the motors turning and the lasers aligned. We are the last generation that will have a direct physical link to the analog era. We are the ones who have to build the bridge. If we don't, the bridge to the past will just crumble into the sea.
It is a moral imperative, really. We have the technology, but as you said, do we have the sustained institutional will to keep the migration going for the next 100 years? It is not a one-and-done project. It is a new tax on being a digital civilization. We have to pay the migration tax forever if we want to keep our history.
That is exactly right. And it requires a lot of very smart people to keep paying attention to the details. Like the folks at the National Library of Israel who are currently trying to figure out how to archive a disappearing message on WhatsApp. That is a technical challenge that would have made an archivist in 1950 lose their mind.
Well, on that slightly heavy but very important note, I think we have covered a lot of ground today. From the equipment graveyard to the real-time archiving of modern tragedy, it is clear that saving something is a lot more complicated than just clicking a button. It is an engineering marathon.
It is a process, not a project. And I hope our listeners feel inspired to go check their own archives this weekend. Don't let your family history become a victim of the equipment graveyard.
Thanks for diving into the weeds with me on this one, Herman. You always make the ISO standards sound way more exciting than they have any right to be.
I do my best. There is a lot of beauty in a well-documented standard, Korn. It is the only thing standing between us and total amnesia.
If you say so. Thanks as always to our producer Hilbert Flemingtop for keeping the gears turning behind the scenes. And a big thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power the research and generation of this show.
This has been My Weird Prompts. We really appreciate you spending your time with us as we explore these deep dives. If you want to see the specific FADGUI guidelines or read more about the laser graphics scan station, we have links in the show notes.
Check out myweirdprompts.com for the full show notes and links to the archives we mentioned, including the Israel Film Archive's digital portal, where you can actually see the results of that 30% they have finished.
We are also on Telegram if you want to get notified the second a new episode drops. Just search for My Weird Prompts.
Until next time, keep your data backed up, your tapes baked, and your metadata clean.
Goodbye.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My weird prompts.